Probably everyone's biggest question in this video would be what to purchase during a recession. And I'm going to get into that right now. So it'll be no secret to everyone here that I'm definitely a fan of diversified economies. And the reason you purchase in diversified economies is for a few reasons. First of all, they recover significantly stronger. Look, if you have an economy that's well diversified in terms of, should I say, it's got multiple industries for it, what will happen is you might have one or two industries that are really badly affected, but not all industries will be badly affected. Now, the reason why Sydney and Melbourne perform best out of the GFC is because they're the best, should I say, performing economies and the best also diversified economies. That's why. Whereas you had somewhere like Perth and Brisbane that did perform but not very well, and they went quiet for quite a long time. And the reason being for that is because the economies aren't as well diversified as Sydney and Melbourne. Now, as sad as it sounds as well, look, the governments really only tend to spend money in these well diversified economies. So they probably shouldn't do that, but they tend to basically throw all the money at the cities and where all the money also is and the actual wealth is in the market. Now, not only that too, but these markets generally are home to a higher level of equity in the markets, generally because you've got longer term residents that reside here. And that's because of obviously jobs, school zones, facilities, and great lifestyle precincts that have everything near them. So even elderly residents, a lot of them will happily stay in areas where there's good, care, there's good hospitals, there's good specialists around, and that's what also why you purchase in diversified economies, because those people don't sell, and often they don't have much mortgage left or sometimes own their house completely outright, particularly in your best suburbs of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. Now, look, not only that too, but their growth cycle will actually start well before less diversified markets. And the reason being is because it's a flow-on effect. Because if you have a city that has a well-diversified economy, you might have industry that is affected, but because all the other industries will start going earlier than a less diversified economy, what will happen is slowly money will be spent in, comparative or competing industries of them, which will then flood money into their market. So that'll start to happen. You might, for example, have a construction shortage, right, in one period of time, but you might have, for example, the banking going very well in Melbourne. Now, if banking is going well, that would mean finance is going well, which means money will start to be spent in property and probably construction, which will then pick up the industry. Whereas if you've got something like mining, for example, and that's entirely based, a city or region that's entirely based on mining, like your Pilbara, and that's shot, you don't really have anything else to pick it up in the region until the whole economy picks back up. You don't have really many competing things that can actually pick it up in the same region. So that's something to consider as well. Finally, in diversified economies, look, growth is more exponential. And then what I mean by that is I don't mean necessarily that it goes up exponentially at the craziest top performing levels year on year that breaks the record for the best performing suburb of the year, but they perform very strongly consistently. Now, your best suburbs will often show up in your reports over the long term. However, they often aren't your number one performing suburb in any given year. And the reason for that is because they're very consistent in nature in the way they perform. And when they go down, they don't go down by much. Whereas you'll get somewhere like in Logan, in a GSC style event, that might go down by 30 or 40% and then pop straight back up by 30 or 40%, which, don't get me wrong, it might be a very good, short-term buy, but in the long term it's not. Whereas you'll get somewhere like Bronte in Sydney that in the terms of a recession, it might only go down by 5 or 10%, then it'll pop up by 15 or 20% the next year. So it won't show up in the media, but it will actually show up in the long-term averages, because then for the 3 years preceding that, it'll do 10%, whereas somewhere like Logan, in most circumstances, might only do 2 to 5%. So it's actually grown more than your, record setter of a single year, but it won't show up in those single year reports. So that's the thing to consider, especially in diversified economies. They won't set the world alight, but they're going to do very well over the long term, and that's what's going to actually make you a lot of money and wealth in the long term and give you that freedom you're after. Look, another thing is purchase in strong demographic markets. Now, this is just from Microburbs, a graph of average median household income. And you'll see in Brisbane, I've said this in previous episodes, so for those that haven't seen them, go and have a look at it. Look, your Brisbane is mainly your 10K ring around the CBD. You've obviously got Fig Tree, Pocket and Chandler that I'd say are probably anomalies where you do have quite a few wealthy business owners and particularly politicians living there. But mainly in Brisbane, your 10K ring around the city is where all the money is. So these are the best performing markets and they perform similarly to Sydney and Melbourne. So if you're looking somewhere like Sydney or Melbourne, purchase Brisbane and also Perth, purchase in your strong demographic markets. So especially in Sydney, you've got your lower North Shore, inner west and eastern suburbs. In Melbourne, you've got your inner west, you've got your inner city, inner east, inner southeast and Bayside. They're your best markets and they're basically your top performing markets in terms of capital growth as well. So consider that when buying in terms of a recession. Look, always purchase houses, never purchase a unit. It's as simple as that. Look, again, as I said, look, the only suburbs I'd really purchase a unit in are suburbs where the house price is probably like $3 million and a unit's $1 million. But in saying that, I still wouldn't purchase a unit because I could just purchase in a different city and get a detached dwelling with better capital growth, and I can actually do a lot more to the dwelling rather than a unit. So never purchase a unit. And this is just off your CoreLogic 30-year report. You can clearly see here that in both capital cities and regionals, houses have pretty much outperformed units at every measure. Even regional houses, which includes places like Broken Hill that are absolutely rubbish, have still outperformed units. So in other words, just never purchase a unit. They just suck. Don't do that. Anyone who tells you to buy a unit, really, just don't do it. Purchase houses only, really. Look, finally, consider cash flow when you're buying versus your income. So look, high cash flow will decrease risk. It'll also ensure that you have appropriate buffer. You'll be able to also capitalize on purchasing quality rather than quantity in a lot of circumstances. So what I mean by that though is when I say capitalize on purchasing quality rather than quantity, what I mean is don't focus on something that's purely cash flow and no capital growth. Focus on capital growth first and then cash flow second, because capital growth is really important because cash flow is a representation of your asset value. So your yield is the yield or percentage of your asset value. But when you go to buy, if you have the same suburb in terms of capital growth and you have one yielding 3%, another 4%, buy the 4% one in almost all circumstances, actually, buy the 4% one, but particularly in a recession, buy the 4% one. Now, finally, in this actual example I'm giving you here of what I would do is I say do not fall for the cheap trap. And the reason I say that is because there's a long-term saying in property, and that is cheap today, cheap tomorrow. There's a reason why it's cheap. If it's cheap, it's probably not good performing, because if it's good performing, it wouldn't be cheap. The only reason it could be cheap and high performing is two reasons. And that is that it started at a significantly lower price point than your more expensive suburbs, or it's going through or going through gentrification at the moment. Now, just make sure if you're doing that, you know what gentrification is. It's not as simple as, should I say, the suburb looking better. That's rejuvenation. Gentrification is when a suburb has wealthier people moving into the suburb and it changes the whole demographics of the suburb. That's the key thing. But for that to be sustained, it needs to have good jobs, good access to the CBD, good access to lifestyle facilities, good schools, a low supply combined with an excess demand from a wealthy demographic. Those are all things that need to happen for gentrification. So you'll see people saying, for example, oh, Shepparton's cheap and it's gentrifying, but no wealthy person wants to live in Shepparton. Sorry, I mean it the best way. I like the town. It's a beautiful town to visit, but in terms of investing, just don't buy there. It just doesn't make sense. Buy in an area that's actually going to gentrify. So consider that when you're buying. That's what you'd buy. So to put it very simply, buy houses in well-diversified economies that are in wealthy demographic areas and that have a fairly good cash flow for the price you're buying in. Don't buy cheap, because cheap today, cheap tomorrow. It's as simple as that, and I really thank you for watching. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you're looking for a buyer's agent in Australia's best performing suburbs, be sure to reach out via www.compoundinvest.com.au. Thanks again and welcome to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.